Welcome to the Wellness Table. I'm your host, Dr. Cheryl Bothwell, and I am so excited that you're here to join me on today's show. We've been talking about body recomposition and how what's more important than what the scale tells us is what our body's made up of. So last week's podcast, number 26, was a deep dive into that. So I encourage you to check out our last podcast, number 27, or number 20, I should say, all about body recomposition. So today I just want to highlight a little bit about that as we look at what the scale tells us, it doesn't tell us what the body's made up of. And so today we're going to explore about what our goals are to be able to build muscle, lower body fat, and if your goal or if you need to lose more total body weight, we can do all of those at the same time. So this is optimal at body recomposition. So I wanted to take a little deeper dive from what we did in last week's podcast as we looked at body recomposition. And today I just want to look at what exercises are going to work the best. And as we think about what do I need to do? How much movement do I need? How long do I need to exercise? And what intensity do I need? And then I wanted to add to the focus a little bit that goes beyond muscle building. And really thinking as well about how can we add more healthy years to our life. So we've often learned that exercise doesn't add a lot of years to your life. The most I've seen in research is about 2 years, but it makes such a difference in how you feel and your energy and fighting disease along the way. So we can add more healthy years to our life. So today I dove deep into what's the current research showing us, and we're going to roll that all out today. What do the national organizations say? I always like to look at that. What's in the news so that we know what are people talking about? What's in current podcasts? What are social influencers talking about? What's the current studies? And then I finish each show, and today's as well, is my thoughts and my recommendations based on my 20 plus years of experience, as well as working with the Take 10 program, where I've had thousands of patients come into an intensive, immersive 10-day program. And we were able to measure with a human performance lab these actual results and feeding them the meals ourselves with our chefs, walking them. And it was a pretty amazing way to see how well do our recommendations actually work. It's beyond just the science and the paper, but when you start applying these ideas and these recommendations to your patient population, I think you learn so much. And I often listen to all the confusion that's out there. And what I have found very consistent is that there are people that know the science, say a PhD, they know the science, they know the statistics, they can interpret the data, they can tell you if it's a good study, but they have not applied that to a real patient or a real client, a real person. And so we still need all that information. It brings all of this knowledge to the table. And then when we look at clinicians and we can see what have physicians seen, what are health professionals seeing, physical therapists, they're looking at some of the damage if we're not exercising in the right way. And now we see joint problems and muscle tear and soft tissue injury. Then we look at the registered dietitians and their impact on nutrition matters too. And I often say we can never out exercise what we eat. And that's what I've always said with my nutrition focus. So bringing together all of these specialists where we've got to look at, have you applied this to a patient population, a client population to see that it really works? Can people actually do what you're saying? And also understanding all the individual situations, lifestyles, goals, limitations, injuries, all the real life stuff that hits us when we make a recommendation and not everybody can actually follow it. So my goal at the Wellness Table is to bring together my knowledge in the science as a researcher in nutrition and lifestyle medicine, and also bring together the clinical application since my experience brings both to the table. And I think that adds a lot of value. But each podcast, I still look to learn more. Nobody knows all of it. And so that's what I'm doing here today we'll look at what everyone's saying about it and make a conclusion that really makes sense for each one of us. So I hope you enjoy today's show. We'll get into the details of it. We'll be able to look at how much exercise, what intensity of exercise do we need to be optimal? And then how can we get started and how can we progress into it? And also, we'll answer the question is, can exercise, have we proven in science currently that exercise can add healthy years to your life? So I hope that you listen to all the details of the show and make sure that you finish. You'll see in the last section of the podcast is going to be our final conclusions. So I'm going to start out with, what are people saying about exercise? And I listened to some podcasts this week that were really interesting, and last week as well, as I was preparing for the podcast. And I just like to see, what are people saying, what is out there. And of course, it's very agreed on that muscle is the king. It's the king of our health. It helps us as we want to lower visceral fat, drop our waist circumference. And we know that as our waist circumference gets larger, that's an indication of more visceral fat around the organs. And this is a higher risk fat. And one of the ways we can measure that is waist circumference. So for women, you can measure your waist circumference 35 inches as a cut point or higher. And men, it's 40 inches or greater. And that is an indicator of a high risk of lifestyle-related diseases, cardiovascular disease, stroke, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, cancer, and even Alzheimer's disease, and as well, all-cause mortality. Waist circumference is a big risk factor. And in fact, in my research and my doctoral program, I really focused a lot on waist circumference. You're going to hear it in all of my podcasts. And I'm a big believer, if we have no other testing, when we did all of our testing in our program and in my research, I found waist circumference to be the greatest indicator of risk based on body composition. And if we had no way of measuring our weight, if we had no way of measuring our percent of body fat, how many grams of fat are on our body, how much is our fat mass, what's our fat-free mass, which is our body composition, waist circumference would be a great indicator where the fat is and how much fat is on our body and if it's putting us at risk. Another thing, I talked about it in a previous podcast, I believe podcast number 21, and I was talking a lot about cancer and angiogenesis. And it's a disease that actually pro-angiogenic. So angiogenesis that helps us build blood vessels and grow blood vessels, repair blood vessels. This is one of our body's natural health defense. And so what we see though is when we're building or adding or storing body fat, this requires angiogenesis to be stimulated. And this is what can raise our risk for cancer, because we can have tumors in our body. And I talked about this in podcast 21. If you're interested in this topic, you'll want to listen to that podcast. But how we can, how many people at autopsy have cancer, have tumors, I should say, but they didn't die from their tumors. And so our tumors require blood vessel and fuel to grow tumors. So when we have more fat mass, we add more blood vessels and it can get circulation and blood flow to more locations where tumors could grow. So this is one of the risks in having a high percent of body fat. So we do need to have a healthy total body mass. If a female has like less than 18 or 20% body fat and a low body weight, sometimes we can really see difficulty with fertility. We begin to see hormone balance. And so fat is an important part of having a healthy total body mass. But that's what we talked about on the last podcast is body recomposition, or knowing our body's composition and knowing how many grams or how many pounds, I should say. Grams is dietary fat. But when we're looking at body stored fat, we're talking about pounds. So how many pounds of fat mass is on our body and how many pounds of skeletal muscle and lean body mass. And lean body mass, just for definition, is everything that's not fat. It would include bones. It includes the iron that's in our blood, fluid, and muscle, and our organs. So that's how much everything else weighs. So our goal is to build our lean body mass, build our skeletal muscle mass, and have a healthy amount of body weight. And again, we talked about that in the last podcast, but I was really excited. I talked about finding a body composition measuring machine, and I did get that this week, and I was really excited to try it. It was the InBody H30, I believe, and it was the more expensive one, but we had the InBody in our Take 10 program. So I was really excited that they had a home version. I mean, we had a $25,000 or $30,000 version of it, but this one was about $340. And I know you can get many of these for much cheaper, but this one had more of the zones and it was from a company that I liked. So I do have to give a shout out to InBody for an awesome home body composition testing machine. It'll give you your body weight as well as what your body's made up of. So I would encourage you to grab that scale if you're really serious about really looking at body recomposition and building muscle, losing fat while you're losing total body weight. And this gives you the tools so that you know that you're doing it right. So today, again, we're going to talk about the exercise intensity to improve body composition, but as well looking at how we can fight disease and add healthy years. How can we go beyond just building muscle? And so some of the influencers that I was listening to, I found it was really interesting. They were really hitting the concept of steps and how many steps we could take in a day and walking. And I like that. That's kind of exciting because it sounds easy and it sounds scalable. So we'll talk about that today, but I had to hit the Daily Mail first. And I wanted to just see what was at the top of the Daily Mail. And again, ultra processed foods all over the Daily Mail since Friday. And looking at, as we've talked about it in podcast 20, 21, 22, really focused on cancer and ultra processed foods, and really being suspect of looking at these as carcinogenic and the rise of cancer that we're seeing, especially colon cancer, stomach cancer, GI cancers in the younger population. And we were talking about under the age of 50. But now they reported a 500% surge in colon cancer and cancers, even in populations up into their 20s. So they're starting it even at the age of 12, 13, thinking what's causing this surge of cancer in a very young population. So that was in the Daily Mail. So again, just another shout out about being concerned about ultra processed foods. We're talking about sugar, high fructose corn syrup, trans fat. And also, as we're looking at where do we stand on processed meats and meats that have been cured, charred, salted to enhance flavor or to preserve them, as well as some of the red meats. So we've got other podcasts on that take a deeper dive, but I did want to shout out at the beginning of this podcast about the importance of whatever our recommendations are, making sure that we're protecting ourselves from other types of disease. So if a recommendation to be able to exercise more and to build muscle includes a recommendation that raises your risk for cancer, I'm not in on it. I want to look at all of it. This is about optimal, all of you as a whole person. So I'm always going to recommend a fine line in balancing all of the pieces and not leaving out looking at your overall health, as well as what you weigh, what your percent of body fat is, what your fat pounds are, and how much muscle that you have so that you do look good and that you do have energy and you are boosting metabolism. But at the same time, we're making sure that our body is able to have all of its natural health defense system turned on. So that's super important. So another article that I saw in the Daily Mail was that sprinters that run a 4-minute mile live the longest. And it was almost 5 years. I think it was like 4.7 years longer. And this was elite athletes who were able to run a mile in under 4 minutes, were found to live about 5 more years than their predicted life expectancy. And this was a new study that was in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. I just threw that at the top here because that kind of got me inspired because we've been talking about exercise to build muscle. And I was like, here's the articles that I'm looking for in the science. And this one made the Daily Mail. So I was really excited because the Daily Mail has been flooded right now with processed foods and cancer for many weeks and Ozempic. So we had something that hit the Daily Mail on this topic. So that was exciting. And again, why is that? And how, what is adding 5 extra years to someone that is an elite athlete that can do that? Now, not very many people are going to be able to meet that goal. So this isn't to discourage you, but it's to add light that exercise does have an impact on our life expectancy, and we need to take it more serious. It's not just the food, it's also the exercise. It's a combination of all of our lifestyle behaviors as well as what we eat and how we move. And this is just more evidence of that. So we're not asking you to all run a 4-minute mile, so don't worry about that. But we also, here at the Wellness Table, my goal is to follow the science. So we want to know what everyone is saying, and we want to come to a conclusion that works for someone individually. And again, for the whole person. So that's the goal of this podcast. So hang with me as we hit a few studies and we'll conclude this podcast and I'll bring it all together and make some recommendation. And my husband is Michael Bothwell, and he is a physical therapist with 20 plus years of experience. And I concurred with him on many points of this podcast because I wanted to get it right. And I'm always really impressed that he's always looking at preventing injury to the body. So I want to add that to this episode, that's got to be also a part of, we're combining nutrition, and let's also combine that we need to train and prepare our body for engaging in a new activity or exercising more, because that can prevent and prepare the body and prevent injury. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in this week, I found that there was a lot of terms or quotes that steps are the king of cardio. That was interesting because I'm always trained a little bit different than that, thinking that the king of cardio is a higher intensity exercise, an aerobic type exercise, and also seeing walking is the king of weight loss. Also, steps walking will oxidize fat the best, meaning burn fat, burn calories better than a high intensity training. So this again sparked my interest because these are trainers and they work with real people every day and they're seeing some great results. And it sounds easy. It sounds hopeful. So I'm really hoping that steps win. And so as I studied and prepared for this podcast, that was, I definitely had a personal interest that at the end of the day, we could continue to recommend that steps are a great way to improve our health. So they're promoting walking as optimal health, and they're pushing the traditional 10,000 steps a day that we've seen recommended. Seen some studies now recommending it can be as low as 7,000 steps a day. And they're saying, let's push this if somebody wants to lose weight up to 14,000 steps a day. And I'm thinking, whoa, that's a lot of steps. And they're just calling 14,000 steps the sweet spot for fat loss and muscle building. I thought that was interesting. Saw several people in agreement with that in social media. So we all know movement is good and getting more steps is even better. That's very much agreed on across the board, from science to the national organizations to the trainers. But can walking give us a high enough intensity for body recomposition so we can lose fat and build muscle? Or is there a better way? What are the pros and cons? What are the health benefits? And so we'll dive into that deeper as we go. But I also saw a reel that was really great on Instagram. And it was like, the modern exercise that we're programmed is bouts of exercise or numbers of sessions of exercise each week. And then we can check box that we've exercised and we're done for the week. But if we think about this would be 30 to 60 minutes a day, what are we doing in our non-exercise time? And so are we sitting? Are we watching TV? We've got 23 other hours remaining in our day. So this was a really great thought because it was like, we have to look at our whole entire day and not just these short sessions that are very, very important. But what about these non-exercise times? And we talked about this in the last podcast, and they call it NEAT. And these are non-exercise activities, and they are combined with your total daily steps and your exercise routine. So we bring that together, and you'll see that today as we talk about steps and walking and if it's adequate, is it enough exercise for us to meet our goals? But it does measure daily movement. So I really like measuring steps. I find it's a great way to go. I have recommended it for over a decade, but I really like some of the new research and looking at some of the benefits of, say, a tracking device. I've got a Garmin on right now, and I track my steps. So I can catch my exercise steps. I can say I'm on a walk, or if I'm bicycling or whatever I'm doing. At the same time, I'm catching how many times I'm walking the stairs, or if I'm walking further to my car. It's all my total daily steps, and that's called the NEAT. So what's great with measuring your steps every single day is if you have a way to monitor that, it can be very clear about how much you're moving throughout the day beyond your 3 to 5 bouts of exercise in a week or 30 to 60 minutes of exercise session in a day. And it keeps us aware of moving more. So I really like tracking steps. I think it's a great health measure to track. So it's very clear that sitting less and moving more is great for our health. And maybe many of you have heard it, but sitting is the new smoking. So the risk for sitting is so much. And I think that depending upon what your daily job is, if you have a desk job and you're um, sitting for the majority of your day, it's really going to be important what you do in the evening. If you then come home and watch TV through the evening, even if you exercise for 30 minutes, we might need more because we're talking optimal. I mean, I'm thrilled if somebody's saying I'm exercising 30 minutes a day. But right now we're pushing the envelope of what are we doing the other 23 and a half hours of the day? How can we move more? And is exercise bouts enough for our body? So that social reel kind of triggered me down that pathway to say, yeah, we got to be aware of what we're doing all day long, and moving more and sitting less is the ideal pathway. And again, it's been termed as the NEAT, non-exercise activities. And we combine that with our exercise, and together that would give us our total steps for the day. So I think that's a great thing to look at. And I also want us to look today, what do the national organizations say about it and what are their recommendations? And I think it's very clear that they recommend steps per day. That seems to be a measure. American College of Sports Medicine, as we're seeing the CDC, steps per day seem to be a very across the board accepted measure. But I think the confusion can come that we've checked a box if we've exercised for 30 minutes, or we've done our interval training, or we've done our strength training. And I think what's great about steps is it tells us our entire day's activity and movement. And then I hear, what are the pros and cons? Because is that enough? And can we do more? So we'll explore more about what's optimal for our body. But I see no negative benefit to, or I see no or con to measuring steps and using it as a way to motivate us to move more. So that would be my highlight of steps, and we'll talk more about it and the benefits of it. So how hard should we be exercising? What's your best exercise intensity to live longer? And we're going to shoot again for optimal. So again, the standard is for exercise is more intense. The longer your activity, the more calories you burn. But we pointed out last week that higher intensity exercise can increase hunger, and lower intensity of exercise, some have called it like a moderate intensity exercise, like a zone 2 you may have heard of, or a brisk walk, can burn fat but blunt hunger. And it's also great, as I'm hearing Michael talk about it, my husband as a physical therapist, that it's also a low impact exercise. So we're going to be at less risk, especially if we're untrained or overweight, of causing any kind of body injury, muscle injury, joint injury, soft tissue injury. So there's a real win to that as well. So that's why I'm all ears about, is it enough? Do we still need to do more? Is moderate intensity exercise, walking, enough? And it's great for those that need to lose weight, lose fat, and build muscle all at the same time. Again, blunting hunger is powerful if we're trying to lose total body weight, if we're trying to lose body fat, if we're trying to eat less, if we're trying to maintain our calories. And this is what Ozempic is about. So I thought this was perfect that we've been talking about weight loss. How do we naturally feel full from the food that we eat and our lifestyle? So we know that protein blunts hunger. It kind of shuts down the hunger hormone, crushes hunger at each meal. And we've talked in depth about that in our podcast about Ozempic, number 25 podcast. You might like to see that one. How much protein do we need to shut down hunger? And fiber. Those are key. But now we're looking at a lower intensity exercise, like a low to moderate exercise, like zone 2 exercise or a brisk walk, can also blunt hunger. So I want to always point out anything that can work with us to blunt hunger, because now we can really feel like we're getting in control of our body by doing things the natural way. So could we then summarize this to say that if we want to do a moderate exercise or a lower exercise, walking, let's say, we could do this cycling, you could do this swimming laps as well. But I think walking is the steps. We're kind of focused on this today. It's low impact. It blunts hunger. It'll help you reach your body recomposition goals. We're adding to strength training 2 times a week to everything that we're talking about today. But right now we're just talking about the steps, the intensity of exercise. But at the same time, now we can add to the list, I think that's exciting, that it's also helping us have an Ozempic effect by a moderate to low intensity of exercise. So there are lots of people that when they do a higher level of intense exercise, that they'll find themselves more hungry. And it's actually the majority of people. So that's where this is based on. Another quote that I often say, and it challenges people, I get challenged all the time. I've been saying this for over 20 years. Again, as a registered dietitian, I continued with my doctorate in clinical nutrition, and I still say it. Nothing's changed. My approach to this is we cannot out exercise what we eat. So I want to remember that throughout this, that we combine this with strength training and we combine it with a nutrition plan. And it takes that whole package to make this work. But I think it's important to know that burning calories through exercise will boost metabolism. There's so many benefits. We regain energy. It makes us feel better. It makes us want to move more the more we exercise. But to just remember that, cheesecake or Haagen-Dazs ice cream can add 300 to 500 calories, in just a pretty quick minute. And we can add that to each one of our days, and we can add a lot of excess calories very easily. And we'll still build muscle and we will still feel better from exercise, but we won't lose weight. So if you're not losing weight, the calorie maintenance is key. And podcast 26 talked about calorie maintenance and what you need to eat. So I'll send you to that podcast if you want a deeper dive and if that's something that you're interested in. But today, I just want to highlight that I think it's really important to always remember that we cannot out exercise what we eat. And calorie maintenance and knowing what a calorie goal is for us when we're trying to get our body at its ideal body composition is key. So if you're talking about what social influencers are saying, what the social media is saying, I'm super excited to be able to summarize and bring it all together. And again, as we were talking about these health influencers that were talking about exercise as walking was the king of cardio and the king of weight loss. And again, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's like that challenged, or I felt that I would almost challenge that statement because it's new to me. And I really wanted to see, is it accurate? I would love it to be accurate. And what's the science say about that? So the current recommendation is walking about 10,000 steps a day. I've seen some other studies lowering that, like I said, to about 7,000 steps a day. But we're talking about daily movement. I think more is better. It's absolutely. And we can count non-exercise steps as well. And remember, even if you're doing higher intensity exercise, that would count towards your steps as well. It's going to go faster. You're going to get your steps quicker. It's the pace. So as we talk about walking, it's highly recommended for weight loss and cardio training. And some of these trainers are saying that 14,000 steps is the sweet spot for daily steps. How could I recommend that to someone and not just totally make them give up? Because that feels like a lot. And just to summarize it, a rule of thumb is that there's about 2,000 steps in a mile for an average person's stride. And again, this is just a rule of thumb. And most adults would, in a 20-minute mile, would be walking about 3 miles per hour to reduce their heart disease. And that would put you at a moderate intensity exercise. So if you're walking 2,000 steps, you're walking about a mile at a 20-minute pace, you'd need to walk about 5 miles to reach a 10,000 step goal every day. And again, we're not talking about 5 miles at one time. We're talking about your entire day, including going up the stairs, including walking to your car. All movement would count toward this, including your exercise session. So this is a combination of everything. But it would mean that you have walked on your feet that day about 5 miles. And it, again, like I said, it can be broken up at any time of day. It's combined. So if you push that to 14,000 steps, like these trainers are suggesting to get optimal weight loss, this is for people that want to lose weight and have the most cardio benefits. Now we're talking about 7 miles a day. So if you're walking 14,000 steps at 2,000 steps a mile, it's about 7 miles. And if you're walking at a 20-minute per mile pace, you'd multiply 7 miles times 20 minutes. And that means it's about 140 minutes of exercise every day. And that's about 2.3 hours. But now let's think about what that really means, because 2.3 hours is also, if we break this down, there's 22 or a little bit, let's say 21 and a half hours that means that you were sitting. So if we look at it like that, it isn't quite as discouraging. At least it wasn't for me as I was looking at it. I'm like, we're talking about a 24-hour day. And of those days that we're walking, 2.3 hours and not in an exercise. You're not on a treadmill this whole time, is what we're saying. It's your total movement time. And if you walk at a faster pace, this will go much faster. So at an 18-minute mile pace, multiply that by 7, and you can do that in about 2.1 hours or 126 minutes. Now let's take it to 60 minutes, just so you can have some hope with this. And this would be if you're actually like really out there exercising. It's a brisk walk. You're going 7 miles. You could do that in about 112 minutes or 1.86 hours. So again, increasing your pace decreases the time to hit your step goal. So if the optimal step goals are 14,000, like they're recommending, and they're seeing success with people as trainers, then I like to see how that works and how would that be possible. And again, remember to encourage myself on it too, is that all your steps count. So it's not from one bout of exercise or one session, it's your total day. So again, this is your NEAT steps. We can increase our NEAT steps by taking the stairs at work and moving at lunchtime. And we'll talk more about how we can do that. But remember, if you're walking about 2 hours a day, it means, again, that you're not in motion for about 22 hours, especially if you're tracking it like I'm tracking it with my Garmin. If you have an Apple Watch or Fitbit, whatever you like to use, you can see your total steps. And many times you'll get, depending upon how active you are, if you have a job like working in the hospital and you're walking the floors, you're a nurse, you're going to have a lot of steps in your day. And at the same time, if you're somebody that has a desk job, you will not have as many steps in a day. So I think it's really important for us to look at optimizing our steps and to look at the confusion that many Americans exercise isn't optimized. So we could be sitting all day at a desk job, watching TV all evening, but we hit the gym for 30 minutes 3 times a week or 60 minutes 3 times a week. If you think about that, is that enough exercise? 150 minutes? Is that enough exercise for us that the national guidelines are talking about? Is that enough movement for an entire week? And that really did lead me to see this a little bit different and sort of challenge that. It's total body movement and seeing exercise not as just a bout of exercise. And yes, we want to combine those together. So I wanted to look at what are the benefits of 10,000 or more steps a day. And I put together what I was hearing from the influencers and some of the things that I saw in research. And I'm just going to put this together and highlight what do we see with people that are walking 10,000 or more steps per day and what are some of the benefits. And the first, again, remember, is all movement towards these steps count. So everything that you're doing throughout the day that's not sitting, just walking around helps. We've also seen a lot about sunshine. I know the Huberman Labs talked quite a bit about sunshine, but it's also in our wellness score. You hear me talk in each podcast that my proprietary work, my research in my nutrition doctorate was about creating a prescription. I was calling it originally a prescription of diet and lifestyle habits of what to do every single day in a 20-point score. It's the 10 foods. It identifies the 10 habits that can optimize your health. And they're correlated with higher scores, were correlated in my research to the lowest risk for chronic disease and for a longer longevity, living healthy longer. And so sunshine has been a part of my score for 15 years. You get a point for spending 20 to 30 minutes in the sun. So I loved when Huberman Lab and when he talked about it in his podcast, because sunshine and walking, you don't hear enough people talking about it, but it's something I've been talking about for 20 years. So walking, we can get a double benefit if we walk outside in the sunshine. So I think that's really powerful. And I think that as we've looked at cancer and we look at skin cancer, it scares a lot of us. We cover up and we don't get the sun exposure that we may need. So I think this is important for us to look at early morning sun, like very early morning sun, looking right into the sun we're talking about 7 a.m., 8 a.m., super early, not the bright sun, can help synchronize our body clock. It helps with melatonin, helps us sleep better at night. It gives us vitamin D. And in my research, I showed that if we expose our body, 40% of our body without sunscreen, without a sun barrier, early morning when it's not damaging, to just get a little light pink color in the early morning, not a sunburn, that this will give us 40,000 units of vitamin D. So it's very protective against cancer, and it even protects against skin cancer, having enough vitamin D. Our recommendations in our RDA for vitamin D are far too low, in my opinion, and I have challenged that for some time, that if Yes, it prevents rickets where we're at, but how could we actually prevent cancer? And when we get a high enough vitamin D level, we're seeing a cancer protective effect, even skin cancer, lung cancer. But it's the right amount of sunshine. And again, getting it right. So this isn't a podcast on the sunshine. We'll talk about that another time, but I'm a big fan of early morning sunshine. And in the wellness score, you get 1 point for 20 to 30 minutes of early morning sunshine every single day. And again, so we can walk and get our sunshine points for the day and our quota for the day. We can socialize. It's important, our social health and our mental health, that we take time and connect with friends. And walking is a great thing to walk with a friend. And again, another point on the wellness score. So walking, we can get our sun, we can socialize, we can learn when we walk, we can listen to a podcast, we can find joy in every single day by doing something that, like if we enjoy walking over as much, or let's say the dreaded high interval training, then we may find walking brings us more joy. And there's benefits to that as well. I just think it's important that we find joy in every day. One of the other benefits is walking helps us stay lean. This was pointed out by the influencers in a strong way, by the trainers. It lowers body fat, especially at the waistline, burns calories, blunts appetite. And so that was a great point. And again, I wanted to highlight it, that walking can help you gain muscle and stay slim, was the summary of so much of what I was reading. And I'm in full agreement with it. Walking increases metabolism without driving up hunger. It blunts hunger. So there's some real benefits to a lower intensity exercise. I see that with Rachel Paul. She's a PhD in psychology. She's a registered dietitian, and she has a program called Best Body. And I hear her all the time talking about it with lowering the intensity if you're not losing weight. And if you're still hungry, is lowering the intensity of exercise. So I'm seeing this very commonly done, but this was someone that was a registered dietitian with a PhD, not in nutrition, but in behavioral change. And she's a real advocate of a lower intensity exercise. And that got my attention as I saw these other influencers saying the same thing. And she's having great results with it as well. So again, a low intensity exercise can have a Ozempic hunger blunting effect. So we'll take it. But what does that mean? Well, let's just say, what does that mean for the high intensity side of it? Let's differentiate as well that low intensity exercise would be like walking, swimming, and cycling. But if we're looking at exercises like running, sprinting, a faster exercise where the heart rate is getting higher, then this is where we're looking at like even the HIIT training. And it's one of the most effective ways of burning fat. It's cardioprotective. We'll be talking about it today more and more, but it can also drive hunger in the majority of people. It actually is something that if you're trying to lose weight, then many people are saying, let's go with this moderate level of exercise until you start to get to your weight goal. It'll blunt the hunger, and then you can start progressing into a higher level of exercise. The other benefits of starting with a low to moderate exercise, in addition to blunting hunger, is looking at the impact to a low impact exercise to get your body trained and to prevent muscle and joint damages. So we want to prevent strains and injury. So we don't want you to have muscle tears and joint injuries, because this is what training our body can really protect us from having these problems. Because what happens is we can become the overachiever exerciser, and we just start out full blast. I'm going for all of the recommendations of the highest trainer that's out there, and I want to gain muscle, and I want to lose body fat, and I want to lose total body weight. And so we just go for it, and then we get an injury, and our body is not prepared for it. We also don't have the glycogen storage for it. And the next thing you know, we are at rest of that muscle or that joint until it heals. And boy, that can be really discouraging. So slow and steady. You will continue to hear me say that in this podcast. Don't be an overachiever if you are not trained and exercising regularly. Get your body ready and go slow and steady, start building and progressing. And at the same time, if you're overweight, just understand that you're already moving more body weight, that somebody else could wear a weight vest to be able to push the challenge or to challenge their body weight from walking. But you're carrying one if you have 20 extra pounds on your body, or if you have 50 extra pounds on your body. That's already a higher calorie burn just from you being overweight. And it also can cause more joint problems, muscle problems because of that. So as we're looking at trying to lose weight and using steps and walking more, again, we're talking about the benefits of, again, pushing to say 14,000 steps a day. And is that possible? Test it for yourself. You could run for 30 minutes and you could walk for 60 minutes or get your 14,000 steps a day and test this 1 week one way, 1 week another way. If you are trained enough and that you are fit enough to be able to do that, and check your hunger level. And you can be able to see, does it affect your appetite when you run versus walk and the intensity? And if you don't find that it has any effect on it, great, then you've kind of done the test yourself. So let's also be aware that walking can burn calories. And we often think we have to go faster and high intensity to burn calories. And yes, we do burn calories, but there's no one size fits all answer to how many calories that you burn, or there's so many different factors. It depends on your weight, your pace, and even the terrain that you're walking on. But the simple answer is that your body weight and your pace is really key in how many calories that you're going to burn. And so the faster you walk, like a 20-minute mile versus an 18-minute mile, will burn more calories. It gets you to your step goal quicker. And the heavier that your body weight is, the more calories that you'll burn when you walk. So if you like to calculate your calories burned, I'm just going to give you a quick reference. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but you'll burn 10 calories per kilometer. That's your distance per kilogram of body weight. So to show you kind of what this looks like, if you're walking 6 miles, that's about 9.6 kilometers. And if you weigh 176 pounds, that's 86 kilograms. And you're walking 12,000 steps, which is 2,000 miles a step, means 2,000 steps per mile, I should say, means that you're walking about 6 miles again. You would be burning about 800 calories. The good news is what trainers are showing is that this is mostly stored body fat. And they're seeing body recomposition by recommending this to their clients. So I was really excited to hear that. And they're considering walking a fat oxidizer and a fat burner. So I'm like all in, as I'm always thinking we have to have a higher intensity. So I really, it really motivated the whole podcast today. And a simple rule of thumb, if you don't really like the math so much, is if you walk a mile in 20 minutes, you can burn between 80 and 100 calories. So that's just kind of the range. Depends upon the intensity of your walk. It depends on the terrain, the elevation. Are you walking on sand? Are you walking on concrete? Are you walking on a kind of an uneven base, like taking a hike? You'll burn more calories. So again, and your higher body weight. So if you're wanting to burn calories, you're at a higher body weight, you're probably getting close to about 100 calories when you walk a mile, which is great. And if you're at an ideal body weight, sorry to say, you're probably going to be burning a little bit less calories, about 80 calories per mile. And that's why some of these trainers that are at their ideal weight and they're very, very fit, they're beginning to add these weight vests. And again, don't recommend it for someone. It's a part of the progression of exercise. And so once you reach that ideal body weight and you want to continue progressing, I like the weight vest idea, or also the ankle weights was a great way to look at it. I also wanted to talk a little bit about a brisk walk pace, just to make sure we're clear on it as we're talking about walking. And a brisk walk pace is like 13 to 20 minutes per mile pace. So when we're talking about walking, this is essentially a pace from 3 miles per hour to 4.5 miles per hour. So at this pace, you would be breathing a little bit harder. You're still able to speak in full sentences. And if your walk pace is a 20-minute per mile, it's still considered a moderate intense exercise. And it's not too slow to give you some benefits. So I thought that was interesting. And my Garmin tells me right there, I can track not just my steps, but if I push that I'm taking a walk, it will let me know that you're at a 20-minute pace. If I want to push it up to an 18-minute pace or a 16-minute, and I have a chronic knee injury. So for me, I can know exactly what pace before I start to have knee pain. So I really love that because I can individualize it for me. So my Garmin does great for me in doing that. And I want you to be aware of that. So for me, I'll never be able to jog on my knee from a car accident that I've had. And so this allows me that I'm walking and I can push myself when I'm doing something that has impact. So I'm walking, I just can't do an impact on my knee. So some of you may have that as well, or you may just need to train in and get your joints prepared for it. So that's a little bit of a highlight of that. Again, remembering the heavier your body weight and more calories that you burn when you walk, the intensity and the terrain, they all make a difference. So here's the key. If you're 50 pounds overweight, you don't need to run. You're already moving 50 extra pounds of body. So walking 10 to 14,000 steps can really help get you lean and do it safely. And it's a lower impact and it won't push hunger like it does in the majority of people. So I think that's really great for us to have a goal like that. And I really appreciated what I was hearing from these trainers and very much in agreement. Now, as we look at what the national organizations say, what is the most fat burning exercise? And we'll highlight that. But these trainers were just saying you can get there at 10 to 14,000 steps, especially if you're overweight. So I just wanted to highlight that. Other benefits of walking. And I liked this. They use the term, it sucks up glucose. So I was like, that's a great way to put it, because I'm always talking about it improves insulin sensitivity and it helps us. Walking has an insulin effect. Exercise has an insulin effect. But the concept of sucks up glucose, I thought was very simple, easy way to put it, and it's accurate. So when we're looking at how, when we eat a meal, it raises our blood sugar, and we want to eat meals. Again, this is that combination of a nutrition plan that we're eating foods that slow the release of blood sugar. And so eating meals that have protein and that have enough fiber, especially soluble fiber, will help this. So we're not just surging like from a sugar soda or something like that. But you can see that, marathon runners are doing straight glucose. I mean, they're burning it right then. But when we're just talking about a normal every day and we're doing 10,000 steps a day, let's combine it with our nutrition plan. So when we're eating, we want to eat the right meal. And we talk about that in other podcasts. But again, just that summary is protein, soluble fiber, total fiber, and healthy plant fat. That combination will help slow and release, and again, more whole carbohydrate foods. So we're eating an apple, not the apple juice. So when we're getting our blood sugar, it's packaged ideally with a soluble fiber. So that's what I love about berries. We can get the sweet taste. I like this about whole fruits. We get the sweet taste, the sweetness that we crave. And at the same time, it comes with soluble fibers so that this is not just a surge, and we can eat it at a mealtime. So it can slow and release the blood sugar response. Now we've eaten the food, it's moved to our stomach. We've eaten the right food so that the blood sugar, I call it the blood sugar curve, is a nice balanced bell curve. It's not a rapid rise. Insulin then is secreted by the body naturally, and that is to drive the blood sugar into the cell. So we need insulin to do that. And so what we find with insulin resistance is it starts to take more and more insulin to drive that sugar into the cell efficiently. And that's where we get the challenge, is if we can't get the sugar into the cell, the body tries, but by the next meal, the body has to do something with that blood sugar. Otherwise, unless you have type 2 diabetes, your blood sugar is just going to continue to rise. So the body, to protect you, if it functions normally, it will store that as fat and be ready for the next meal because it couldn't get that blood sugar into the cell. In over 50% of the population, 50 and above, they're beginning to see insulin resistance. And this is why we see waist circumference is a 97, 98% accurate measure of waist circumference. 35 inches is the cut point for women, and over 40 inches or greater for men is a cut point that you have 97, 98% that you are becoming insulin resistant. That visceral body fat is where the body will more likely store that type of glucose that it can't manage, it can't get it into the cell. So this is where walking sucks up the glucose and it has an insulin effect. So we've talked about walking kind of having a hunger effect, the Ozempic effect, let's say, of moderate to low intensity exercise, but walking also helps us suck up glucose and it has an insulin effect. It's really powerful. And I just was really excited as I began to see all these benefits of walking as I was putting it all together in a podcast. I was like, wow, I always knew it was amazing, but now I know, I'm just more supercharged to talk about it. It's really exciting as I see it all put together. And the other thing that we've done in the Take 10 program, we called it an oxygen cocktail, but we did a 10-minute walk after every single meal. I'm starting to see more and more people do that, but I've been doing that for 20 years with my patients. And I worked a lot with patients that have diabetes, insulin resistance. It's the majority of them. And walking 10 minutes after a meal it has a medicine effect where you can actually, someone that's needing insulin and needing more insulin, because we need more and more insulin to the point that we have to start medicating insulin to get sugar into the cell, we can use exercise as that tool. And for most people, what I saw was at least a 20 to 40 point or milligrams per deciliter of blood sugar in just a 10 to 15-minute walk after a meal. So in our program, every single meal, we immediately went within that hour on a 10 to 15-minute walk. And in the evening, it became a 1-hour walk. And that was one of the most powerful parts of our program, is that everybody was getting at least 10,000 steps, and people began to get into it and say it was like a step competition of who had the most steps for the day, because it was a group of 20 people or so in this immersive wellness program and spending 10 days together. So it was a fun way to see how everybody was doing. And the walking really took off. And I found it to be the one thing with the nutrition plan, making that very clear and showing them how to exercise through walking, not be overwhelmed. You don't have to go to a gym. It's easy, it's scalable, and they can see the results. And those people that had diabetes could see, we'd measure their blood sugar, they'd be with us and we'd see 2 hours later, blood sugar's up. Some people, I can't even give them fruit for breakfast. I have to serve it at lunch. I start to see how everybody's doing with diabetes. And so I found that we tested a meal, some people said, I want white rice. No matter what you do, I'm not going to follow anything if I have to give up rice. And I'm like, okay. So what that means is that's a meal where you can have the white rice. I try to show them how to build meals that still have fiber and protein combined with the white rice that they say they love, but also add this walk. And it allowed people with, diabetes, to be able to eat their white rice. That was part of their culture, part of their tradition, and their comfort food. And so that's what I love doing, is how can I help you not give up everything that you love and be able to enjoy life and enjoy foods that you like. And this was perfect. They were happy to walk after a meal that they really, really enjoyed. So just want to look at that combination of the nutrition and how the exercise can help. And the walking does this. So we can improve insulin sensitivity. It helps with diabetes, those that are on diabetes medication. In fact, when they're walking, we have to always let your provider know so that your medication is dosed properly, because I found in my program, people, they can just collapse on a hike. They don't realize how it actually gives them a low blood sugar. So we began to get low blood sugars, which would drive us to having to decrease their dose of medication so that they could exercise more. Medications weren't including their exercise, since this was a change of their normal pattern. And they were coming here medicated on their normal activity. Changing activity really does change the insulin medication that you need with diabetes. So I do want you to be very aware of that and talk to your provider if you decide to start walking or exercising more, to make sure that you're regulating your blood sugar. And we'll talk, it's going to be a future podcast about diabetes and what we can do as well. But that's just making sure that we're protecting everybody. So we're going to lower blood sugar after a meal by walking. We are going to improve insulin sensitivity, which combats insulin resistance, which is the driver of heart disease, so many diseases, and cancer. And we can drop waist circumference and improve our body composition. So that's an exciting part. Another thing that walking does is it improves glycogen storage. So anytime we're doing regular exercise, we will have to have fuel in our muscle stored for that. So the fuel in our muscle, the glucose, is that fuel, and it's stored in the form of glycogen. And it's in our organs, it's in our muscles. And this is how we get exercise endurance. So in the program, I remember in the first days, people would be like, I can't make it to this marker on our daily walks. And slowly, like the first 3 days were really, really tough. But glycogen storage responds to what we've been doing in the last 72 hours, in the last 7 days. And within 3 days, we found people were saying, wow, I'm already building muscle. I'm able to walk all the way to this point that I couldn't do on Monday. And now it's Thursday, and they're walking there easily. And this is glycogen storage. So the first step is we have to have enough glycogen to fuel the muscle so that we have endurance, so that we can then begin to build muscle. That's an important part. And that's why starvation or not eating enough calories and combining that nutrition plan with our exercise plan the glycogen storage is now used to fuel the body to just give you enough glycogen to maintain your calories for the day, your basal metabolic rate, let alone exercise. So what we find is that muscle and glycogen storage are some of the first things that on a starvation diet that go away. And it's not that we're losing fat and we feel like, oh, we're losing total body weight. That's why the scale doesn't tell us everything. Glycogen storage adds calories. So some people, they wanted to measure their body weight every day and body composition in the program. And I learned it was discouraging to them because by day 2 and 3, almost everyone that was exercising enough and drinking enough water was gaining weight. And it took until a week for them to regulate all of that and then begin to lose weight on day 7 to 10. But in those first days, as we're improving and adding glycogen storage so that we can exercise. So that's the natural way of doing it. So I find it to be very interesting, and the confusion that there can be, and someone starting to gain weight, and women are especially sensitive to this, and they start weighing themselves every day, and they can get very discouraged as they see some weight gain in the initial week of exercise if they're not doing a drastic restricted calorie diet. And so a lot of times that drives people to choose a highly restrictive diet. They want to lose weight the first week. I just want to lose a lot of weight in that first week. But it's very important for us to look at the challenges of starvation diets and restricted diets when we're eating less than 50% of the calories that we really need. It just takes up this extra glycogen storage. That's the fuel for our muscles, and it's stored in our muscles and organs. And it's the first body calories that are used in a restrictive diet. And the next is lean muscle mass. So we begin to see that when we're on our very restrictive calorie diet or starvation diet, all we're doing is getting rid of what we need. And we are finding the body fat is, many studies, not even changed, barely moves at all. We've lost glycogen, we've lost lean body mass, and we haven't lost the body fat like we had hoped to. And yet we're starving. And our metabolism is decreased. So now our glycogen storage is depleted. It makes it harder to exercise. And it just is a snowball effect, and it makes weight loss miserable. And so that's why understanding glycogen storage, understanding nutrition, and understanding irregular exercise, slow and steady, how its impact on metabolism and our body composition is so important as we look at our overall health and as we stay encouraged and motivated. And that's what we're all about at the Wellness Table, is to keep you empowered, keep you informed, and keep you inspired every step of the way and keep you current. So that's what we're really doing here today. So let's hit another one. We've talked about it already, but walking improves body composition. So again, the influencers, that it's a weight loss and fat oxidizer. I always have said it's high intensity. And I really love this because I would love to be able to show, and I did in program, that steps, but we combined it with interval training. It was a combination, and strength building, and it dropped waist circumference and total body weight and total fat mass and build muscle at the same time. So could walking alone do it? And they're saying if we push it to 14,000 steps, yes. So that's super exciting to hear people saying this that are right there at the front line and training people. So just to highlight then, we have 2 types of body mass: fat mass and fat-free mass. And again, our podcast number 26 is all about body recomposition, losing fat, building muscle, and doing it at the same time. So I do want you to go back and reference that if you want a little bit of a deeper dive. And again, what happens to your body composition when we starve to lose weight is going to be one of our next podcasts. So I'm not going to get into it here, other than I do not recommend it. And it works directly against what we're trying to achieve really at every single level. So you won't see that recommended at Dr. Cheryl Wellness or for any of my clients or on my podcast. Another benefit of walking is it improves metabolism. This is a biggie, because if we're building muscle, that's the engine. We've talked about that in our last podcast. And so our engine and how much horsepower we have, that's kind of like our metabolism. And the more muscle we have, the more we increase the horsepower of our engine. And eating healthy is the fuel for that engine. And we can think about eating the right foods and getting our body composition aligned so that we can build more muscle. It's all about adding horsepower and how fueling the body properly, getting the right amount of calories, the right macronutrients, optimizes that fuel. And ultimately, our goal is, as we build muscle, yes, we will like how we look, because muscle is very compact if you see what it looks like, and fat doesn't look as good on the skin. But if we look at it also metabolically, it improves metabolism. And what this means is it gives us more energy. It improves mitochondrial function. It regulates blood sugar, and we can even increase the number of mitochondria, which means that's how increasing mitochondria and the number of mitochondria in our body is how we increase the horsepower. So now we have more mitochondria, which is the part of the cell that generates energy. That's our energy production center in our body. So the more mitochondria we have, the more energy we can create. And the way we can drive more mitochondria production is by one of the best ways that we've seen is strength training, but HIIT training, where you have 6 cycles of 2 minutes of a brisk walking and then a 30 to 60-second burst of as fast as you can go, a sprint, kind of a real push as fast as you can go, back to the 2 minutes, 30 to 60 seconds, and you do 6 cycles of that. So this can be done in 15, 16 minutes, 3 times a week. And that is a great way to add mitochondria and to add this to our step goal if it's appropriate for your goals. And again, this can boost hunger. So we're looking at this if someone's trying to lose weight, if somebody's not trained, we would caution that. But I just want to show that walking alone, getting 10 to 14,000 steps is shown to build muscle and lose fat, improve body composition, and that in turn improves metabolism. That's exciting stuff. I'm going to highlight a few more, but lowering oxidative stress to the body. Walking does this, regulating hormones. One of the trainers is talking about that walking is good for testosterone production. I have not seen a study on it. I did not dive into the hormone regulation because that's going to be a future podcast. But I loved hearing that, and it got me excited to, we'll dive into that a little bit more of how does that affect men and women and hormones. We know sunshine, we know an overall healthy exercise and nutrition plan and lifestyle really support healthy hormone production. But I think people get excited if we can see that walking would improve testosterone production. And again, I did not add that into the content of this podcast. And the other is mood boosting. So walking can elevate your life. It can make you feel happier, especially out in the sunshine. It can really elevate your mood for the day. So I think that especially someone that's suffering from mild to moderate depression, or any level of depression, anxiety, the deep breathing, and the outside walking in the sunshine and walking outside, I think is really powerful. Even in addition to being in a gym, I just love the out of doors. And I think that's really great. Some of the other things that I saw is lowering the risk of obesity by 31% by walking 10,000 or more steps a day, lowering your risk of type 2 diabetes by 44%. I saw that in my own program of lowering risk of diabetes by 30 to 40% in just 10 days of walking 10,000 steps a day, adding strength training and doing these oxygen cocktails after meals. So the timing of walking was important. And then the cardiovascular benefits. There is a reduced risk of heart attack and stroke that has shown from walking, and also a decrease of belly fat or this visceral fat by burning these extra calories and developing more lean muscle. But I saw, I'm preparing for this podcast again, lowering dementia risk by 50%, which would make sense. We're improving circulation and we're thinking clearer and better memory. It improves gastric reflux. I think that 10 minutes after a meal was really powerful for my clients, especially those that had gastric reflux. I mean, we were eating the right meal, but walking as well just really improves gut mobility, and it also improves sleep. And then just talking about cancer, as we're looking at fat being building or stimulating angiogenesis and more blood vessels, this can bring more blood vessels to fuel tumor growth in parts of our body that may not have any blood vessel supply. But now we gain fat in that area, and it can then start to deliver blood vessel and blood to grow a tumor. And that really got my attention. I've said this in previous podcasts. I've spent at least 3 podcasts on cancer, but you're going to always hear me highlight it because I lost my 17-year-old daughter to cancer and my mother to cancer. And so I'm looking at cancer. I mean, it drove the mission for me to do Dr. Cheryl Wellness and just looking at what can we do to stop the cancer crisis. And that's why you'll see me talking a lot about this 500% increase that we're seeing in younger people in cancer. I'm all ears to that. So when we're looking at body fat, and that is angiogenic, that means it builds blood vessels, and cancer is angiogenic. So losing stored body fat is so much protecting us against cancer. And again, we want healthy body function with a healthy amount of body fat. We don't want to go extreme with it. But I really like to see men in the 20-25% of total body fat or less. Even when we start to get below 18 to 20% total body fat for men, then we start to impact hormone. So I like that 18 to 20% really goal for men of total body fat. And again, this is looking at if they're at a healthy body weight. I've got my new body composition scale from InBody, the H30, and I'm loving it. And it gives you a range. It's not going to be exact, but it really helps you see the trend of where you're going. Women tend to have a higher percent of body fat than men do. So I like to see women in that 20-30% body fat range, not really above 30% body fat, but 25-28 would be really ideal. When women start to get down to 20%, 18% body fat, I begin to see this effect on the cycle, effect on fertility, periods start to change. And that's when we don't have enough body fat. So when people would come to us for fertility, we used to say that Take 10 was the fertility program. But as people began to get healthy, we always had we just called them Take 10 babies. And many young people came to our program for fertility and had a lot of success because our focus was very much on getting a healthy body fat. And so many women right now want to be very, very thin. And it does affect hormones and fertility. So it prevents cancer. And again, just as we improve our body composition, we could say that it improves fertility if we get to the right goals and the right balance. So when we look at what the recommendations are, how do we start walking? How do we increase the burn from walking? Some of the recommendations are to start at about 8,000 steps a day and begin training and train up and then progress and train to 10,000 steps a day in a few weeks and then move to that 14,000 steps. And find that sweet spot where you're going to get all the health benefits, you can lose weight and improve your body composition, and at the same time not boost hunger. That's a really great formula. Let's remember to learn while you walk, do the sunshine, socialize when you walk while you work, take a Zoom meeting, audio, and walk during your meetings. There's so many people working from home right now. But the great thing about walking is that it's scalable and you can increase your workout by simple changes. You can change the terrain. You can walk on grass, sand, you can hike, you can look at hills, elevation, but some of these simple changes, these micro movements of uneven terrain add more calories and really strengthen our body. And again, we're always combining 2 to 3 times per week. 2 times is our minimum of strength training to all these protocols. And then the brisk walks, if you can't, and maybe go into a brisk walk, but you can't maintain it your entire exercise bout of walking, consider sort of that HIIT training, but do it by walking. Go, walk at a 15-minute mile pace or a 16-minute mile pace, and then move for, 2 minutes to a 18 or 20-minute mile. And for 30 seconds or 60 seconds, kick it up and sort of do interval training with walking. And I think that's a great way to progress your walking and your steps to be able to maximize your calorie burn. And just know the more time you're on your feet, the more calories you're going to burn for the day. But we're really not just looking at calories in versus calories out and burning. We're really looking at optimal health and how can we improve metabolism and add horsepower to the engine. I think that's ultimately the goal. And then we want to remember that NEAT, the non-exercise time, combines with your exercise bouts for your total steps. And also we want to look at what are the challenges of walking. Are we getting enough cardio exercise if we're not doing high intensity for cardio? And that was my question at the preparation for this episode. And so as I looked at this more carefully, I just see so much benefit. But getting your heart rate up to 70 to 85% of your heart rate max really is ideal to do this for a certain amount of time per week. And it's a very small amount of time, but combine it to your ultimate goal is moving more, sitting less, and your daily steps at that 10 to 14,000. And that's what we did in our program. We did 3 sessions a week of HIIT training. And that HIIT training was going to the targeted maximum, like that burst of 30 seconds. We would just make it maybe a brisk walk. And then we would go to a slower walk for 2 minutes. And those were our 6 sessions. And we would just pick up the pace on those 30-second bursts as it was appropriate for people. And sometimes that might take 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 12 weeks as they went home. And we would continue to work with them to reach a goal of hitting a 70 to 85% of heart rate max during those 30-second bursts. But you may be hitting it at 60% of your heart rate max. Sometimes when people came in on day one during their 30-second burst of interval, we were at 40% of their heart rate max. So you can check out how to calculate your heart rate max, but I'm going to just focus here a little bit more on are we getting enough cardio exercise without high intensity cardio training? And also how much time. It takes too much time to hit this many steps. It takes 2 hours or more of walking daily. Again, these are combined steps. And the faster pace that we walk, the more calories we burn. So if we're walking the same miles at a slower pace, we're going to still burn fat, but it's going to take us a lot longer. So a lot of people say, well, I'm just jogging. I'm just going to go quicker and get it done. And I think that there are many ways to argue that point, and I think it really is what works best for you. But just remember your total daily steps, taking the stairs, walking further to the parking lot, these neat non-exercise activities count in your total daily steps. So moving 2 hours a day doesn't sound so difficult if you look at a 24-hour day and saying, I don't want to be sitting more than 22 hours in a day. So and some people standing. I think standing can be super hard, but you're definitely burning more calories standing than you are by sitting. Some people have a standing desk that they can work at. And so I think that can be also helpful. Now let's look at what the national organizations recommend currently. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Resources has these exercise guidelines for healthy adults. And what they recommend is, and again, this is a public health message, that aerobic activity, this is the higher intense, these are cardio activities that start with a moderate aerobic activity, which is going to be about 50% of your heart rate max up to, say, the 85%, that range, depending upon where you're at, and getting about 150 minutes of this in a week, or you can get about 75 minutes of vigorous exercise. So if you're able to do vigorous exercise for 75 minutes, that's in that 70 to 80% of your heart rate max, then you only have to go 75 minutes of activity in a week. And then you combine this. You can also combine this so that you're doing some moderate and some vigorous. And a lot of, like, my Garmin sets a goal for those guidelines. So when you're looking at, did I meet my goal or did I meet the general goal? I think you can customize what your goal is, but you will always shoot that you're getting 150 minutes of moderate activity and hitting that heart rate. And again, the Garmin and the Apple measure your heart rate as you're exercising. So you'll be able to know, did I get that 150-minute goal for the week? And so it's an easy way to measure it. The national guidelines also recommend for optimal, however, and I thought this was really good to see, they recommend 300 minutes or more of moderate aerobic activity or moderate exercise intensity. And so this is like that brisk walk, anything in that 13 to 20-minute miles. So that range is saying if we do that for about 300 minutes, that would be ideal for someone that wants to lose weight and keep that weight off. So I thought that was interesting to see that they do have a higher point in the national organizations. They just are trying not to discourage people and get people to feel like if you get 150 minutes of moderate exercise intensity or 75 minutes of vigorous exercise intensity, you've met the minimum goal. But the optimal is they're really pushing this up to 300 minutes a week. And again, remember, this is more specifically as a bout of exercise. This is 300 minutes where you're actually exercising each week and you're getting your heart rate to this level. So it'd be a little bit different than, again, steps would count. But if you're just walking leisurely, that would be your total daily steps. A little bit different because this is not, again, using steps. This is looking at minutes. And again, they combine that with strength training. So they recommend doing strength training for all the major muscles in the body at least 2 times a week. And one set of exercise is enough for each muscle group, major muscle groups. Strength training is important. They're recommending 12 to 15 repetitions using free weights, weight machines, resistance bands. They also include activities that use your own body weight, like squats, lunges, planks, rock climbing, heavy gardening. These types of activities use your own body weight as strength training. So I thought that was a good one to know as well. Things that we can do at home or something that's very easy. I wanted to see what the American College of Sports Medicine recommended. And they set a daily goal of 10,000 steps per day. And they try to increase your steps from whatever your baseline is to reach this level and add about 1,000 steps per day every 2 weeks until you reach your step goal of 10,000 steps. And I really liked how they valued that progression and recognize that the body has to prepare itself, glycogen storage, giving the body time, and making sure that we're preventing injury. So the American College of Sports Medicine was all about that. This was also recommendations from the CDC, and they recommended for all healthy adults 18 to 5 that they should participate in moderate, intense exercise, aerobic physical activity for 30 minutes, 5 days a week. And considering this 150 minutes of moderate intense exercise or vigorous exercise for a minimum of 20 minutes, 3 days a week, which is about 60 minutes of vigorous exercise. So when we combine strength training, that strength training program could be performed on a minimum of 2 non-consecutive days. And their goal is to have one set of 8 to 12 repetitions for healthy adults or 10 to 15 repetitions for older or frailer individuals. When CSM talks about the athlete, I was looking for what were their recommendations for optimal versus public health. And their optimal for an athlete was 12.5 steps per day was considered an athlete, a very active athlete, and 10,000 was considered active. So I liked seeing what their cut points were and how that compared to the trainers, and very much aligned. So I really liked seeing that. Let's look a little bit at what the research says about how hard we should exercise and the intensity. There's a paper at the New York Post, and it stated that exercise may not be the key to living longer. This was in December of 2023. Exercise might not be the key. So showing that new research is showing that moving around more, it can actually accelerate aging and it doesn't increase longevity. So I thought that was very interesting. And it's much of what I learned in my doctoral program as well, is that we don't look to we look at it to feel good, to improve the engine, to have optimal metabolic health, but not ultimately to live longer, which never made sense to me. And I just kept thinking the research has to come. It has to follow that people that exercise regular, especially doing it well and balanced, would have a longer, healthier life. And that was what my podcast today is. Where are we at right now in the studies to show that that's possible? And then in December, another study from researchers at the University of, and I cannot even say the name, it's not a name I can pronounce, but they were found that exercise was important to living a long, healthy life. So they're kind of getting close to it, but nobody's saying, how do we does adding exercise literally connect or correlate to living longer? And a study that was at the University of Texas, at Dallas, it was the Center for Vital Longevity, and they had a study, and it supports the idea that the brain of older adults who exercise have less cognitive decline. Well, that's a great thing, but not longevity still. And then another study found that 20 to 25 minutes of physical activity a day, this is again like a bout or a session of exercise, can help prolong life and lower mortality risk. And the second finding in this study was climbing more than 5 flights of stairs per day was really helpful as well in prolonging life. So I thought, well, this is exciting. So a massive study that was published in the Journal of Circulation uncovers how much exercise is needed to live longer and how much and what level of physical activity is needed to reduce mortality. So they quote a 2018 physical activity guidelines that recommend adults engage in at least 150 to 300 minutes per week of moderate intense exercise or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous exercise intensity, or a combination of both intensities, both moderate and vigorous. And this study turned out that if the adults do more than the recommended amount, it could lower their risk of death. So this kind of indicated that maybe our recommendations weren't enough. So 2 large prospective US cohorts, 116,000 adults, self-reported their leisure time and their physical activity. And they defined exercise that it was outside of leisure activity, just in this study. And the study found that working out 2 to 4 times beyond the minimum vigorous physical activity recommendations or the guidelines that were in 2018 led to a lower risk of death from cardiovascular disease. Now, that was really phenomenal. And those that worked out 2 to 4 times more above the moderate physical activity or exercise intensity and guidelines to about 300 to 599 minutes per week saw the most benefit as well. So this was really powerful, and really what I was looking for is to find some research that could show us some main quality research of the impact of exercise and how far do we need to go? What's that intensity to reach these goals? So participants who performed 2 to 4 times above the recommended amount of moderate physical activity, here were some of the results: 26 to 31% of lower all-cause mortality. Now, that's a great thing. This is exactly what we were looking for. 28 to 38% of lower risk of cardiovascular disease mortality. And on top of that was observed a 25% to a 27% lower risk of non-cardiovascular disease mortality. That means dying of something other than cardiovascular disease. And additionally, adults who worked out 2 to 4 times more than the recommended amount of vigorous physical activity or exercise intensity. So this is taking 150 to 299 minutes per week, were found to have a 21% to a 23% lower risk of all-cause mortality, dying from anything, according to this study. And they were also reported to have a 27 to 30% lower risk of cardiovascular disease mortality. So we're talking about lowering our risk for dying here, and a 19% lower risk of non-cardiovascular disease mortality, again, dying from something other than cardiovascular disease. So this is really powerful. And so again, they talk about combining moderate intensity and vigorous intensity exercise had the best results, and substantially lower risk of mortality was observed in individuals who had adequate levels of both long-term moderate and vigorous physical activity. So again, meaning they've done this for a long period of time. So highlighting that those with insufficient levels of moderate physical activity each week that have higher levels of vigorous physical activity were associated with lower mortality. So this was very interesting because that wasn't the case for those that had high levels of moderate physical activity, more than 300 minutes per week. So the key point here was that any combination of medium to high levels of vigorous exercise, 75 minutes per week, and moderate physical activity or intensity of 150 to 600 minutes per week can provide nearly the maximum mortality reduction, which is 35 to 42%. Now that's really powerful. And I really wanted to see what that number was. And that was reducing mortality by 35% to 42%. That's powerful. And I think a lot of this is I'm looking at nutrition and then how much exercise were they doing? Always looking at that combination. We were always following with exercise in most of the studies using the 150 minutes per week goal that are part of the national guidelines for the standard American. And we weren't seeing results. Some studies, the most we saw was 2 years of an exercise effect of increasing longevity. But most of the time, we would say that exercise did not increase longevity. It was more quality of life and supporting disease management and things like that. And so, what it shows again is that in research, if we weren't getting the exercise high enough, and that's what I wanted to see, because in nutrition, my expertise was we're not getting vitamin D levels high enough, or we're not getting enough sun, or we're not eating the right amount, or it's the right type. So we see a study, and it can be very skewed if they don't get the parameters right, and the study might not show usable information. And that same thing can happen with exercise. So I really wanted to see is there this quota that we get to? Like we see this with alcohol, with the J curve. It's like, a small amount of alcohol can be even protective, and it can create lots of confusion in the studies. But as soon as someone gets more than 0.5 to even 1 serving of alcohol in a day, and doing this more than 5 servings in a week, we begin to see a J curve of increased risk. So with exercise, moving more really does make a difference, and we're not moving enough. And maybe in our modern society, we're looking at 150 minutes. It's checkboxed, and we're saying we did our vigorous exercise and we did our 75 minutes and 25-minute bouts of vigorous exercise. You're jogging 3 times a week for 25 minutes, checkbox, and now you're at a desk job and you're watching TV the rest of the day. And that isn't going to, and it appears to be here in this study as well, not going to give you the maximum mortality reduction of this 35 to 42%. We've got to raise our numbers, and we can see even up to 600 minutes per week. So I thought this was interesting because I'm going back to what the trainers were saying at 14,000 steps a day and pushing that number. And we'll sort of tie that together as we keep going and to see how this looks as we put these recommendations together. So powerful results. Love that study. It was a really foundation study for this podcast and very exciting to see those numbers. So there was a separate study that was published in JAMA in Oncology, and it just showed the benefit of small bouts of intermittent physical activity or exercise intensity that was associated with lower cancer risk. So this was just taking brief, sporadic bouts of vigorous exercise during the day, like this fast burst or jog or stair climbing for like 1 to 2 minutes, and doing this throughout the day. And again, it would count toward your total steps, but this was a study showing that impact on lowering cancer risk. So it made me think of interval training and the 6 cycles 2 minutes, a 30 to 60-second burst, doing 6 cycles of that. It improves mitochondria. And we can see here that would also improve and lower cancer risk. So I thought that was really powerful. So what we can see with these studies is that high intensity doesn't hurt in our exercise plan for sure. And it's well documented. Moderate regular physical activity prevents cardiovascular disease. Now we're looking at it in all-cause mortality, reducing again, cardiovascular mortality. And now we're seeing improving cancer risk. So we've talked also about lowering our obesity problem in America and improving body composition, helping us to be less insulin sensitive. So this is going to help with type 2 diabetes as well. Let's clarify some definitions about exercise intensity and impact so that we're all on the same page with our terminology. Exercise impact is about how hard the exercise is on your joints and muscles and soft tissue. So like jogging and running versus if you're swimming, cycling, and even walking, it's a lower impact exercise. I just want to make sure we're on the same page as to what we mean by that. But when we talk about exercise intensity, we're really looking at your breath and your heart rate, whether you're sweating, how tired your muscles feel as you exercise. So you can measure your exercise intensity, and that's how we look at vigorous or moderate or low intensity exercise, is we're looking at intensity. Impact is another part or another piece to the puzzle. And as we look at training and getting our body prepared, then we can look at starting at a lower impact exercise. And if your goal is, then you can increase to a higher impact exercise as your body is trained for it. But when we're looking at exercise intensity, we can measure the intensity by how we feel, or we can call this our perceived exertion. So a lot of times people will look at how do you feel when you're running really hard, or if you have an easy workout, and your perceived exertion may not always be similar to your heart rate level. So again, it depends on the person. So there's some subjectiveness to this, and if you're trained or not. So you can be running alongside someone that's very trained and they're just talking away and you're like panting because you haven't been climbing hills and you aren't as fit. But when you hit vigorous exercise, even a trained athlete isn't singing at that level because they're not getting their heart rate up if they are. But we can the simplest is to measure heart rate, and so you can gauge it by using technology. And so that's what I use with my Garmin. You can use an Apple Watch, and you can check your heart rate with an activity tracker that includes a heart rate monitor. And if you feel in tune with your body, you can use perceived exertion if you prefer to do it that way. So moderate exercise, we've heard this called zone 2 exercise, but it can be walking. So I often look at the moderate as in the 50% to 70% of your heart rate max, or just under that 70%. And so most adults will need to walk faster than 3 miles per hour to get to this point. That's a 20-minute mile. And so we've talked about that. A brisk walk is anywhere between 13-minute mile and a 20-minute mile. And I love that my Garmin can tell me exactly how many minute mile of what I'm walking or what I'm doing at the time. So I can sort of range that. And I think 3.3 miles per hour is about an 18-minute mile. And it goes from there. I think 3.5 miles per hour is about a 15-minute mile. So this is how we can look at moderate intense activity. For most people, it feels somewhat hard. There are some clues about your moderate intensity. Is at a moderate level, or how you feel your breathing quickens, but you're not out of breath. You're starting to lightly sweat. You're after about 10 minutes of doing the exercise or the activity, but you can still talk to somebody. And again, but you couldn't sing. In vigorous exercise, this is a high intensity exercise. And this is like running, HIIT training, bicycling, swimming laps, hard, heavy work, or aerobic dance. And these activities feel challenging. And so here are some clues that you are exercising at a vigorous level. Your breath is deep and rapid. You start to sweat after only a few minutes of exercise or activity, and you can't say more than a few words without pausing for a breath. So as we kind of wrap this up, I just want to look at, we've talked about consistent exercise is good for everybody's health and well-being. That's very well known. But when we look up what these trainers are saying, the national organizations, the American College of Sports Medicine, kind of pushing what's that optimal level? Were we exercising enough in these studies? And so as we look at moderate to physical activity and lowering risk of mortality, I was really excited about the study in Circulation showing that 35 to 42% decrease in all-cause mortality. So I think that was increasing, almost doubling the guidelines for exercise. influencers talking about walking as an excellent way to reach our goals. If it's an exercise that helps you lose weight, helps you lose body fat, it improves insulin sensitivity. We talked about it having an insulin effect. It supports blood sugar regulation, which means it's going to improve type 2 diabetes and blood sugar regulation. It improves your cardiovascular health. We saw improving cancer risk, can drop your waist circumference. We talked about all these benefits and add more healthy years to your life. And a 35 to 42% decrease in all-cause mortality. That was pretty awesome as I looked at pushing the envelope, and these influencers were talking about walking more and walking at that 13 to 20 miles per hour pace. So I think, and using different terrains and how we could progressively reach our goals through exercise. So we pointed out last week how higher intensity exercise can increase hunger, and where moderate to lower exercise, like a zone 2 exercise or a brisk walk, can still burn body fat. It's still a cardio training, but it will blunt hunger at the same time. And it can also be protective if we combine this with it, because walking is a low impact exercise. We're protecting our joints and muscles and soft tissue from injury until the muscle's more trained and able to do a higher intensity or a higher impact exercise, like jogging, running, sprinting. These are all high intensity exercises, but they're also high impact exercises. So if you're just starting out, the recommendation, and again, when I asked my husband as a physical therapist before I started the podcast, it was just to be really aware that if you're not been exercising, if your body is not trained, and if you're overweight, that it really can put your body at risk for injury, muscle strains, soft tissue injuries, and joint issues. So then you end up stopping exercise to heal. And then the next thing is that you're now having to motivate yourself to get back and get started again. So the goal is slow and steady. There's a lot of benefits to starting with a low to moderate exercise and adding this high intensity exercise as your muscles and joints become more trained to be fit, and it prevents you from strains and injuries. And why do you get these muscles tears and joint injuries? It's because your muscles are protecting the joint and they're not prepared to handle higher loads. So when you're adding a higher intensity, your body isn't trained for it. We can start to have these challenges. So at a lower intensity training like walking, you're training the muscle and the body and the soft tissue for higher levels of work. And walking or moderate exercise trains the body and it prevents damage. So it acclimates to the demand. It helps the body acclimate to the demand that you're putting on it with this extra load. And it all, let's remember on the fuel side of it, that we need glycogen storage fuel for these higher demand exercises. And that can take about a week to kind of get that started. And so if there isn't enough fuel, we call it hitting the wall. So people exercise and then they hit that wall and they feel like they're not able to keep going. And so training our body through that and combining this with a nutrition plan, and again, 2 times per week of strength training is ideal. So now when we're looking at high intensity interval training, it's clear it's one of the most effective ways to burn fat, as we've seen in the Take 10 program, as we've seen in previous studies. It's powerful in fighting cancer. It meets all these health goals. And this is a variation of interval training that involves short bursts of this rigorous cardio followed by intermittent rest periods. So we're talking about, the cycle. And what we recommend and what you'll see in our guidelines and our activity guidelines in our wellness score is a step goal is there of at least 10,000 steps a day. And then we have a HIIT training of 3 times a week, and it's 6 cycles, or you can just do straight vigorous cardio or intense exercise 3 times a week with 2 times a week of strength training. But what we have found is that interval training is really a great way in a short period of time to get a powerful workout and have less impact and strain on the joints from running and sprinting. So again, we talked about this in the top of the show, is that you can base this on your heart rate max goals and maybe start at a 40% maximum heart rate, 50% during your interval, during your sprint time of your interval of your 30 seconds to 60-second sprint. And the 2 minutes is a slower walk. And you slowly build this so that you're actually doing this 6 cycles of 2 minutes of a lower intensity and 2 minutes and 30 seconds to 60 seconds of as fast as you can go, whatever that is. And then that will build up. But let's just make sure, I think a highlight here is let's don't look at exercise in a vacuum. If you burn 800 calories, let's say, and you're doing higher intensity exercise, and it's driving hunger, and now your appetite is increased and you're eating 500 extra calories, it's going to be much harder to lose body fat and much harder to lose total body weight. So again, back to the statement, you can ever out exercise what you eat. So exercise and nutrition go hand in hand. How many calories you need to be eating, starting slow and steady is your goal. And remember that this is a lifestyle. It's not a 10-week or a 12-week boot camp or diet or program. This is setting yourself up for long-term success, preventing injuries, maximizing the benefits, making sure we're not driving hunger. So now we're just eating more calories. Again, our appetite is a part of how we feel. And I think if we're hungry all the time, that's not quality of life. And we will tend to not stay with something or a program that makes us feel hungry all the time. It just isn't comfortable. So walking can help with weight loss and just pushing that number up above that 10,000, up to that 14,000. And the benefits that it's a scalable exercise and that we can move from a low to moderate intense while we're walking. It's also a low impact exercise. So physical therapists are happy, and it can bring many health benefits metabolically, and it can improve body recomposition and improve our overall cardiometabolic health, and also decrease our risk for mortality, help us live healthy years longer. It can also help us burn more calories and develop lean muscle and lose belly fat. So a lot of great things. And again, looking at, we just needed to raise, when we're seeing the rich, raise the guidelines of how much we need to be exercising, and especially walking, if we want to use it as a way to lose weight. We need to add more steps to the day. We need to move more than 30 minutes 3 times a week and sitting more the rest of the time. So more movement. Even if we're exercising at 14,000 steps, it's still 2.3 hours of the day that we're walking. Again, all of that movement counts. So that means the rest of the day, you're either sitting or standing. You haven't been walking. And that's, 21 and a half hours or almost 22 hours of the day. So that makes it not feel so bad. 14,000 steps is the sweet spot that we saw today from the research I pulled together for this podcast for losing weight and losing fat by walking. And this improves our total health, and it gives us more movement, and it doesn't increase our appetite. So I just think if you need to lose weight, this is our takeaway, is that lower intensity and moderate intensity activity. And I like that as we look at walking, we can move from a 20-minute mile to a 13-minute mile. You've got that scale. And brisk walking, it's moderate intense activity, and it can be very powerful, and it's of lower impact. So it can really help us to start exercising. It can help us meet our goals. It can help us lose body weight, and it can prevent injury from joints and muscles by this type of activities. Really exciting to see what these numbers are. So let's pull this together and look at the goals for lowering mortality and mortality reduction by 35 to 42%. The research showing any combination of medium, moderate to high levels of vigorous exercise of 75 to 300 minutes per week, and moderate physical activity of 150 to 600 minutes per week. And what we're seeing is 14,000 steps a day, moving above that 10,000 steps a day, and doing this at a brisker walk, doing some of these bouts of exercise, adding interval training to the day 3 times a week. And again, always adding that strength training so that we're building muscle as we go, and moving all the muscle groups and doing that 2 times a week is a way to be able to really add more healthy years to our life. And I think what we're learning today is that we can do that by walking, so that we can walk at a brisk walk and not increase our appetite or feel like we're hungry and then we're just eating more calories. But just looking at targeting your maximum heart rate, and a 70 to 85% of your maximum heart rate is considered vigorous intensity exercise. And if you're in that 50 to that 69% maximum heart rate, you're going to be at moderate level of exercise. I was impressed with the results as I prepared for the podcast, what I've seen in my own clients and in my own program. And I really because I feel like walking can be something that is doable. It's easy. It doesn't sound hard. You don't need a gym membership. Again, inexpensive. And I love the scalability of it, that you can start low and you can progress to a moderate intensity, and you can pick up the pace in walking. You can change the terrain that you're walking on. You can walk up hills, you can walk on a hike, you can walk on the concrete, you can walk on sand, all of these things impacting your calorie burn and the health benefits. And then strength training 2 times a week. It just is very powerful if we're trying to build muscle. So the concept of what we started at the top of the show of walking is the king of cardio, walking is the king of fat burning, and we wanted to challenge it. I would say that walking and moderate exercise can also be the king of longevity. And it's got a medicine like effect in not boosting our hunger as we try to reach a goal of losing body weight. These are very powerful things. Fighting cancer, fighting is improving all cause mortality. We can walk at a different pace and a different level to reach these same goals. So very excited about that, and to see that exercise can fight off diseases like cardiovascular disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, and even improve dementia. So super excited. And remember, we're in this for the long term. And it's not a lifestyle. It's not a 12-week boot camp. If we want to stay lean and fit with good body composition, we also want to do this over time. We want to progress. It's a slow and steady start so that we don't have any injury, and that we make sure that we're protecting our body every step of the way. So be aware if you're that super achiever and you're like, I'm going for it. I'm going for 300 minutes a week of vigorous exercise and 600 minutes of moderate exercise, and I'm going to get my 14,000 steps in, and you're not trained, or if you're overweight, just remember that this is where you can set yourself up for an injury. So jogging and running are both high intensity exercise, and they're high impact that can injure your body, especially if you're not trained. So that's going to increase your risk of a muscle strain, soft tissue injury, joint injuries. So the overachiever might find themselves, the overachiever beginner might find themselves with an injury. So I just want to caution you to that. I know it isn't as fun, slow and steady, but if you get an injury, you're totally off track, and it's so hard to get back on track. Muscle tears, joint injuries, not fun. Let's protect our body. Let's start slow and steady. Let's start adding 1,000 steps a day, whatever your baseline is, whatever you've been doing. Start measuring that and start adding, and start doing the strength training. But again, slow and steady. Don't get a tendonitis or a tear or an injury, because you're right back to start over with your whole process. And then again, glycogen storage. Remember that we need fuel to move more. And so our body will memorize what we've done in the last 72 hours, the last 7 days, and it will store glycogen based on matching your level of exercise and intensity of the past 3 to 7 days. So if you want to get ready to fuel and you want to start having a higher demand of exercise, it takes your body 3 to 7 days to get you ready for that. And again, if you're really training, it can take several weeks to really get there. So it's really important for us to know in that first week that we need to focus on moving, pushing, progressing, getting our body prepared, and getting more fuel prepared so that we can exercise more. It prevents us from hitting the wall, should I say, and it helps us improve our endurance and be ready to meet our increased exercise demand. And it's really important for us to remember that it's very individual where you start with your exercise, your age, your fitness level, your body weight, if you're overweight or obese, if you've had past injuries. Staying at a moderate, intense exercise with a lower impact can give you a really great health benefit without putting your body at risk for further injury. So please be aware of that as we talk through these guidelines. And if you can't get your heart rate higher without putting your body at risk, you really can look at how can we do lower impact, like the swimming, like the walking, because a lot of times higher intensity exercise comes with a higher impact. So be aware. Let's don't put our body at risk, and let's weigh the benefits to that overachiever and not giving ourselves time to be slow and steady. What do we recommend? Again, is moderate, intense exercise. Walking is perfect for this. We can scale our walking. We can change our pace. We can be at a 20-minute per mile pace and start moving it to an 18-minute mile. 16-minute mile, a 15-minute mile. We can do intervals with walking. We can change the terrain. We can walk on hills. We can get our heart rate up, and then we can walk on the flat levels. We can walk on sand. We can hike. So having those little micro adjustments to our feet, all of these things are great things to do. But as we look at our total daily movement, it's our exercise, it's our walking sessions, that are cardio training that we do, combined with our NEAT, which is our non-exercise activities, taking the stairs, walking further away, taking a Zoom meeting while you're walking, putting all of these together and trying to push beyond that 10,000 steps a day to say that 14,000 steps a day. What I'm looking at is let's set 10,000 steps as your minimum daily goal, and let's push to hit 14,000 steps, maybe 3 to 5 days a week for optimal. And let's start pushing the envelope. So we're talking about moderate intensity at the 13 to 20-minute mile pace. At the 14,000 steps that the influence trainers are pushing for, that's almost double these recommendations from the American College of Sports Medicine. So I wanted to highlight that as we bring this together, that we want to push the exercise and push these numbers up to burn fat and to meet our body recomposition goals and to not have injury is 14,000 steps. So I really was encouraged to see that this, how realistic is it? And when you look at combining 14,000 steps, that's 7 miles. And if we look at about 20-minute mile pace, that's about 3 miles per hour. That's about how long it takes us. So this is about 140 minutes or 2.3 hours of walking. And this takes us 7 miles. So I just want you to know this is all of your walking, and it's walking at a pace where we can increase our pace. We can speed up the time if we speed up the pace. So we can get the 7 miles done quicker if we move to a 15 minutes per mile rate pace. And that's where some people say, as they build up, I'm going to just start jogging some of it, and then I'll walk some of it. And you'll see that again, we're getting our 14,000 steps. But ultimately, you can do all of this with walking. So if you're walking at a 15-minute mile pace and you're going 7 miles, you can do this in about 1.75 hours or 105 minutes. And that's your total day. So again, it sounds like a lot, but this is your total steps, not just your exercise time. This is that NEAT. So non-exercise time. And now I want to remind us again of strength training, at least 2 times a week of non-concurrent days. 2 times is enough. Keeping strong muscles is super important to aging healthy, boosting metabolism, building muscle, body composition. Protein muscle synthesis, we talked about this on podcast 25, I believe, but it's about building muscle, and it needs strength training to do it combined with a nutrition plan. So if we're just eating and we're not doing strength training, we will not be building muscle optimally, and vice versa. If we're doing strength training and we don't have the right nutrition plan, we won't optimize muscle protein synthesis. So that's the goal. And remember, the scale is not the whole story. So it's really important for us to look at total body composition, how much fat we're made up of, how much muscle we're made up of, and what's our total body weight, and how we can get this all to a healthy place. So I think what we've seen here is that high intensity exercise, we can progress to that, and we can train for that through walking, and we can then add 3 bouts or 3 sessions, 25 to 30 minutes, maybe getting up to between that 75 to 90 minutes per week of high intensity vigorous training. And this is getting your maximum heart rate to 75 to 85% of your maximum heart rate. So that's doable. These sessions count in your total steps for the day. So it just gives you more steps quicker. So when you see someone that's doing high intensity training or they're doing jogging, they're going to hit 14,000, 16,000 steps in a day, much easier and much quicker than someone that's walking it. And then let's remember to adjust as needed. If your hunger is driven by higher intensity exercise, then look at lowering that intensity of exercise until you hit your target body weight and slowly increasing that intensity so you're not shocking the body or stressing it to drive hunger. So we know that weight loss really works well with walking at a moderate intensity for most people because of its hunger blunting effect. It prevents injury, and then all the benefits that we've talked about on this show. So I think that's a really powerful one. And if your joints and muscles can handle the high impact jogging and running, go for it. But if you're feeling joint pain, start pulling back and go back to walking and scale this and make it scalable and make sure that your intensity is based on the pace and the terrain. And also be aware, I like when you reach your healthy body weight, some of the trainers were recommending these weight vests or these ankle weights. And so that was a great way to be able to continue to walk once you met your weight goals, and continue to progress and advance your exercise and your training. Also remember, low impact activities like swimming, laps, and cycling can give you high intensity exercise that increase your heart rate, without being higher impact exercises. So the daily goal for those that want to get lean and fit, hit your step goal. 10,000 plus daily steps. Push that up to 14,000 steps and try to hit those 14,000 steps as many days a week as you can. Strength training 2 times a week. That is a must for everyone that wants to maintain and build muscle and maintain it throughout all the decades of your life. And then as you train, and if your body allows and your health goals, adding 3 bouts or 3 sessions a week on different days, non-concurrent days, we say every other day or Monday, Wednesday, Friday of high intensity exercise is enough. And so even 25 to 30 minutes per session. And if you're doing high intensity training, those 6 cycles can be done in about 16 minutes. And again, those steps count towards your daily goal. So that daily goal is your overall reach of how much you have moved through the day. It includes your interval training. It includes your high intensity, vigorous exercise, your moderate intensity exercise, and your low intensity exercise. It's all combined in your total daily step goal. So to wrap up today's episode, I'm excited to see that 10,000 steps, pushing it up to 14,000 steps a day. It combines all of our activities of the entire day, how much we move, taking the stairs, leisure activities, all the things that we do. And if you're having like a Garmin or you're tracking it with technology, it helps you see your total number of steps. I think it's a great way to stay on track with our exercise goals. And in the wellness score, you're going to see, if you go to drcherylwellness.com, that is our website, and that's where you'll find the free score. It'll also be in the show notes of how to get your free score and see the 10 foods and the 10 lifestyle behaviors that includes activity, to be sure that you're doing everything you can to turn on your body's natural health defense and improve your body composition and live your healthiest life with the most energy. So check out that at drcherylwellness.com, grab that free score. And for those of you that want to start on this wellness journey and you don't want to do it alone, I do want you to know that we have a wellness membership where I'm there to guide you every step of the way. It's a full digital diet and wellness program. And it basically is Take 10, and it's summarized into a digital program. And I'm there with you every step of the way to do expert coaching, and it has a private member podcast that takes us to actionable and the next level so that you know exactly what to do. So if you're interested in being a member, check that out also at drcherylwellness.com. That my goal is to offer nutrition and lifestyle medicine to everyone at a lower price. So many people cannot afford it. And this is a membership that's just $37 a month. And it also goes to fund the Wellness Table podcast. So our members' subscription and monthly fees are helping to support the Wellness Table podcast so we can get this information to the most people possible, because that's my goal and that's my mission at the Wellness Table podcast and also at Dr. Cheryl Wellness. And so I hope to see you, and I hope you check out our website. So we're wrapping up this episode. Thanks for joining me at the Wellness Table. If you like the episode, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform, or we're on YouTube if you want to watch this video, and it's at Dr. Cheryl Wellness on YouTube. And our YouTube subscribers are growing a lot this week, so we're really excited. And so I'd love to see you subscribe to us on YouTube or on your podcast platform and help us grow the Wellness Table, and we can reach more people with wellness. And again, we're here to empower and inspire you every single week. So I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next time.